Hi, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. The news has been particularly hatty this week. The Trump impeachment hearings have gone about as good as can be expected, with both Republicans and Democrats working together in harmony in order to find out the real truth of this situation for the betterment of the country. Just kidding. The Republicans are claiming that this is all just a corrupt attempt to take Trump out of office because the Democrats can't beat him next year. Meanwhile, the Democrats believe that even the way that President Trump takes a leak is an impeachable offense. So let's parse through these impeachment hearings so far. The core issue is, did the president use undue influence for personal enrichment? That is the fundamental charge that the Democrats have leveled against him. They claim that he issued a quid pro quo to the Ukrainian president that basically said, if you don't investigate Biden's kid, you're not getting $250 million in military aid. Trump has denied that this has ever happened, claiming, hey, the money was sent. But that's kind of like saying, I tried to kill this guy, but because I failed and he didn't die, attempted murder isn't really a crime. So let's look at what we actually know. The money sat in purgatory for 2 months. Then the president had this phone call. The president of the Ukraine said he was doing the investigation, and then miraculously, the money was freed up. You be the judge. Trump also argues that while he didn't do it, even if he did do it, it's fine because everybody does quid pro quo. And he's not wrong. America, as do all nations, routinely trade money, power, and influence in order to get what they want. The question here is, was he doing this for the betterment of the country, essentially trying to figure out whether the former vice president used influence in order to put his family in a position of power that was against the interest of the United States? Or was he doing this to badly damage his top opponent going into the 2020 election? One version is for the nation, the other version is for himself. Not to say that even if this was for the nation, that this was a routine or appropriate use of power. Even Condoleezza Rice was very uncomfortable with the fact that he asked a foreign nation to look into an American citizen. However, it's not necessarily illegal. Again, this is an area where you're going to have to judge for yourself. The truth of the matter is the political party that you tend to agree with is probably going to determine how you look at this issue. There are also two things that you need to consider specifically when you're looking at the Joe Biden situation. Joe Biden did withhold aid, but he did so in concert with State Department policy. This was a policy he did not create, but was simply following. That isn't to say that he wasn't affected by his son's potential involvement or influence, but on the face of it, it doesn't look like Biden did anything illegal. Second, the president was operating both a formal channel and a backdoor informal channel made up of Rudy Giuliani and Rick Perry in order to deal with the Ukraine. This in itself isn't necessarily far different from what many other presidents have done in the past. However, witness testimony paints a pretty ugly picture of the way that Giuliani was treating people abroad. One witness in particular, former Ambassador Yovanovitch, claimed that Giuliani went out of his way to pressure Ukrainian officials to attack her publicly and make her look bad to the United States. While she was literally on the stand talking about this, the president tweeted the following: "Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go?" Then fast forward to Ukraine, where the new Ukrainian president spoke unfavorably about her in my second phone call with him. It is the United States president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. So literally, the woman is on the witness stand talking about the way she was mistreated and intimidated, and the president tweets that. So Congressman Adam Schiff, never one to dodge the limelight, gets essentially told this by an aide during this testimony and proceeds to read this tweet to the woman and then ask her how she feels about it. She obviously replies that that was intimidating, and now she looks even better and sadder and more pathetic, and everyone feels for her on the witness stand. In terms of being a sympathetic witness, Yovanovitch did a great job. You felt for her as she recounted finding out that she was being fired while at the funeral of an anti-corruption activist that was murdered. However, It is also important to remember that firing diplomats happens all the time. President Obama, for example, fired every single one of George Bush's appointees on the same day. So where are we? In terms of raw evidence, the Democrats are going to need something very concrete and clear to move the GOP from its current stance that this is just a witch hunt. We already know about the phone call and what was said. There's probably a good chance that this was a quid pro quo of some kind. But since we already know the punchline, that President Trump asked the Ukrainian president to look into Biden's kid, and the United States only swung 3% more towards impeachment, I wonder what's really going to happen when the entire joke is revealed. Is anyone really going to care more than they do right now, or has this already peaked? Barring something more egregious coming out in this testimony, there's a good chance that this is going to be a party line vote in Congress, which will push it to the Senate purely on Democratic power, and then it'll rapidly get killed in the Senate. Everyone already knows the president isn't a diplomat. Everybody already knows that the president steps on it all the time on Twitter. And everybody already knows that the president ignores or breaks rules at a whim constantly. And yet his support hasn't really moved. This is no different. I once again maintain that if the Democrats want to beat this guy, they're going to have to do it in the polls and not through this impeachment proceeding.
But Trump isn't the only one facing impeachment. In student government impeachment news, the student body president of the University of Florida is also facing impeachment. Apparently, members of the student government are upset that he hosted Donald Trump Jr. at the school and are looking to impeach him. Student body president Mike Murphy is being accused of using student activity funds to donate to the Trump campaign. Murphy and his supporters deny these allegations. Mostly, it seems like people who don't like Trump are raising a stink that mirrors the current impeachment inquiries. Just in case you wanted to watch a younger, more watered-down version of the current news. Hats off to the future leaders of today.
A lot has been made this week about the Supreme Court allowing the families of Sandy Hook to sue Remington. However, thus far, this is really overblown. The case was all but thrown out day one. The 2005 Protection of Lawful Commerce of Arms Act protects Remington very clearly. That act essentially protects gun manufacturers from being sued for what other people do with their products. That protection remains. The reason the appeal was successful is because the plaintiffs changed their case and are now suing Remington for inappropriately marketing to children. Most lawyers believe this case is really thin, and there's a good chance that this is going to end in summary judgment for Remington's favor. To win, the plaintiffs are going to have to prove that Remington knowingly marketed these products to children and not to the general public. Based on the ads that they are claiming were marketed to children, they're going to need both a very sympathetic judge and an extremely sympathetic jury to win any facet of this case. Bottom line, this was probably just an attention grabber that media used for clicks.
A deadly shooting in California at Saugus High School left 2 teens dead this week. Democrats immediately recommended taking away the fundamental right to self-defense from all Americans and handing it over to a central government that is currently being run by a man that they call a racist and a dictator. Republicans, on the other hand, prefer doing nothing and pretending like there is no issue at all.
Virginia police have launched a manhunt for Michael Alexander Brown. Brown is wanted in connection with the death of his mother's boyfriend. Reports say that Brown deserted his post at Camp Lejeune last month. One insider says that police plan on creating a mock beachhead in an attempt to get Brown to try to storm it. This plan was only put into place after Brown thwarted many Crayola crayon-filled traps.
Federal authorities have arrested 11 out of 14 suspects in a crime ring case run by 3 brothers out of the U.S. The defendants imported 10,000 fake iPhones from China, made to look broken. Then they would go into the Apple store, exchange them for the real thing, take those and export them to other countries and sell them at a premium. Apple alleges that it was defrauded out of about $6 million worth of product. The crime ring was comprised of a network of Chinese family members who owned 2 cell phone repair services in San Diego. The 3 brothers who led the crime ring were naturalized U.S. citizens from China. The brothers and their accomplices have been charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to traffic in counterfeit goods, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to launder money. Each charge carries itself a 20-year maximum sentence. Talk about cell service.
Former governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, has announced he's running for president. And absolutely no one cares.
Speaking of candidates no one asked for, former New York mayor and billionaire Michael Bloomberg may be throwing his hat into the presidential ring. Thus far, the Bloom has not officially announced his run for the presidency, but he has filed papers with at least 2 states to be on the ballot. On top of this, Bloomberg has dumped $100 million into online anti-Trump advertising campaigns targeting key states like Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. You know, that's exactly the kind of spending we need in a presidential hopeful. Not battling homelessness, mental health issues, or providing school supplies. No. If you have $100 million laying around, we hope you do the right thing and spend it all on an advertising campaign smearing somebody you don't like.
Following up on the AirBNB shooter in October, the police have arrested 4 suspects. Police have still not figured out what this was all about, but they have noted that 2 of the victims were armed. AirBNB released a statement that had a bunch of platitudes that completely amounted to them just trying to avoid being sued.
The Hong Kong protests have escalated further this week after one officer shot a man at close range and protesters set a man on fire. Protesters allegedly set up a stronghold out of the Baptist University of Hong Kong. Authorities have accused protesters of manufacturing weapons and Molotovs, which of course they have. Thus far, the Hong Kong government has not addressed any of the other demands from the protesters, which would be a step in the right direction to putting these protests to rest. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam reportedly met with government officials this week, but no agenda was released to the public. This doesn't have a lot to do with the story, but protesters are actually making longbows and shooting flaming arrows at the police, which is actually pretty cool.
And finally, in Florida Man news, a 22-year-old Florida man was arrested for giving the police a false identity. Police asked Andrew Layton to leave a park that was closing at 6 p.m. in a suburb of St. Petersburg. Layton initially refused, and when asked for his name, provided the police with the name Bend Over. He then gave the officer the finger, got up in his face like he was about to hit him, and then walked off into the evening night. Shortly thereafter, he was tackled and arrested. He reportedly is being held right now in jail with his cellmate, Ben O. Burbidge. Admittedly, this is a pretty tame Florida man story. We originally were going to give you a Florida man story about a woman who bit her partner on the penis after believing that he had cheated on her, but actually hadn't. But what was the joke going to be? She gave bad hat? And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and I've got to tell you, I just love capping the night off with a nice hat.